What's going on, guys? My name is Tommy. Welcome back to the channel. It's time once again for another episode of min-maxing for fun and profit. Today's episode is mostly at the request of Nicholas Lopez. He and I talked a few weeks ago in the comments about how Necromancy was a little underpowered and how he hoped that in the playtest and moving forward into Pathfinder 2nd Edition, Necromancy would be buffed, would be a valid thing here for us all. And of course, this is, after all, a tabletop role-playing game. There's only one way to figure out if it's valid. Well, we're gonna have to try to break it. So, this video is for all you evil boys and girls out there. Let's build us a necromancer. But hey, real quick, this channel is directly 100% supported by patrons. You guys make the world go round as far as I'm concerned. This video was brought to you in part by our very newest patron, Ellie Nielsen. Thanks for your support. Looking forward to continuing to kill you dead in Heroes of Undarin, our Doomsday Dawn playthrough. Now, anyway, let's hit it. Okay, so for those of us who may be new to Pathfinder, those of us who have come over from the playtest from 1E, a quick disclaimer. If you're playing a Necromancer in Golarion, Pathfinder's setting, there is no way, shape, or form whatsoever to do this without being evil. Necromancy in Pathfinder is a definitive evil action. Several people have asked why that might be a thing. Actually, I, in my early baby days, commented in both Pathfinder Facebook groups I was in asking why it was the case, and of course, running up to 2 anthills and kicking them over. But as far as Paizo's lore goes, Necromancy prevents a soul from moving on after death. Anything from animating a zombie, entrapping the poor farmer's daughter who you've killed and reanimated in that rotting corpse evermore, or becoming something like a lich yourself. There's this lady by the name of Pharasma, not to mention like all the good gods, who have a big problem with that. Now, of course, your setting can certainly be different. Necromancy can be a totally acceptable thing. Maybe you have something like alchemical undead, maybe in some kind of warrior culture when a warrior's life is taken in battle, he comes back as undead to fight for his home and his people once again. But again, if we're on Golarion, that's the first thing we have to accept. The second thing we have to accept in this video is that Necromancy in the Pathfinder playtest has a couple of hurdles it has to climb over, which sort of feeds back into the first thing. Back in the day, we had several spells that would create undead of all shapes and sizes for us. There was a gold cost involved. If they were intelligent, they would, if you were a little too weak when you made them, immediately get mad and attack the party. But they were there. In the playtest, they are not. So to play this character, we definitely have to have both party and GM consent for it to work effectively. We can't show up to a party of 4 paladins / characters who are going to archetype into paladin with our necromancer and expect to get away with it. By that same notion, we can't have a legion of undead if we can't make them ourselves without going out and finding them. Session 0 is incredibly important to this character. As of right now, it cannot function without it. Personally, I'm holding out that, like Planar Ally or Consecrate, Animate Dead will become a ritual, and heightening it will get you better undead and stuff, but for now, it's all about going into the graveyards, going where the undead are, and binding them to your will. Now, for this build to work, Wisdom and Charisma are the name of the game. The class that supports a Necromancer the most right now is a Cleric. So a Cleric will be what lately, honestly, I'm starting to call the chassis. The class we take at level 1, knowing that almost every class will want to archetype out. That said, we're going to need really good wisdom, but also we're going to have to raise our charisma as well, as that's what dictates channel energy. I've heard a lot of things about the 2nd edition cleric recently, and I think that's our next Tuesday video, because I want to talk to you guys about it and get a better feel for what even is happening. But for now, all we need to know is our Necromancer will begin play as a Cleric. We need those 2 stats, so we want to play a race with a flaw, because we want the 3 ability boosts to make sure we can have the highest Wisdom and Charisma we can get. A halfling looks pretty good for this, with a buff to its wisdom and dexterity. Con and Chaw for a gnome isn't the worst either. So I can't believe I'm still saying this. I guess we're gonna play one of the smaller races. Again, they just seem the most powerful in the spirit of Lem, and so we don't have to get adopted. I think this time we're gonna pick the halfling. Again, we are accepting the ability flaw in strength. It's totally cool to begin play with 8 strength. You don't need it. You're a very back row kind of character. Now, our background in this build, we don't normally talk about them, but this time it's really important. Again, we can't create our own undead. We have to go hunting for them. We have to find them. We have to know where they are. We have to know all about them. And to do so, I think the easiest way to do this is to be an acolyte, because we get our hands on the lore skill corresponding to our deity. And yeah, if we're playing on Galarian, if we're just using the core playtest deities, you got it. We're worshipping the Pallid Princess herself, Urgathoa. If the patron goddess of undeath in the Inner Sea region doesn't know where to find the various levels of undead, I don't know what does, but that's the idea here. Keep religion trained, have this lore check, make checks, go to whatever graveyard happens to be ghoul infested, or whatever battlefield is spitting out banshees left and right because a bunch of elven battle maidens were killed. Bind them to your will, you get the idea. Now, down to our class. Remember, channel energy is only giving us the ability to heal or harm, equal to our charisma modifier, and some of these feats are very dependent on that. We've got to use them wisely. Of course, Urgathoa is saying we're harming, but that said. So out the gate, our first feat is Healing Hands. Deadly Simplicity is not helping you out because you've got a scythe. Emblazoned Symbol is a dead feat these days. Holy Castigation, obviously super bad. You could do life sapping, but just have some heal spells for yourself, and I think you'll be fine. Again, this build's probably not really front of the line. And before I go any farther, I want to shout out Joseph Citadino, another one of our patrons, our patron Necromaster over at the Discord. We've talked about this build a lot, and it kind of plays off some of his ideas, really just one big one. Anywho, it's Healing Hands. Add a verbal casting action to the casting of the triggering spell, and increase the number of hit points the target regains by a d8. If you're at least 10th, you increase it by 2, at 20th it goes up by 3. It's a pretty straightforward thing. Of course, if you're new to this, you might not know, but undead are healed by the harm spell, and the heal spell hurts them. And it's been kind of a trend, and you guys can watch both the Animal Companion benchmark and our Scared to Death video. The lower things are in level to you, the easier it is for you to be able to do things with them that require saves. That said, our Necromancer is most likely going to have lower tier undead, especially at the beginning, under their control, so the more we can heal back to them, the better. No reason in my mind to not take our dedication now. It is a little bit different for what I expected for a Necromancer, but it works pretty good. It's the Bard dedication. That's the 1-2 punch of this build. We have to go find our undead, and we have to accept the fact that sometimes the undead are going to be a little smaller than the things we're fighting. How do we counter that? We buff them. Undead are immune to far less things than they used to be. The Undead trait just says that an undead is destroyed at 0 hit points, it's damaged by positive energy, it's healed by negative energy, and it doesn't benefit from healing effects. But the stuff like the immunity to morale bonuses, though of course that's not what a bard's passing out right now, that stuff's all gone. So that's how the build works, that's the idea. Grab them, buff them, send them on the way. How do we grab them, you ask? Well, good, I'm glad you asked, because now it's time to talk about it. At level 4, we'll be picking up Command Undead. It requires us to channel negative energy. Hey, it's still evil. And it's a meta magic feat now, of all things. When you begin casting harm using channeled energy, targeting one undead creature with a level equal to or less than your cleric level -3, jam a verbal casting action on the triggering spell to change its effects. Instead of being healed, so if it fails, it's not the end of the world, The target attempts a will saving throw to resist being controlled by you. If it's already controlled and we're playing tug of war or it's Airbud and we're seeing which one the doggo will run to, well, zombie dogs are scary. The controller also gets a save. No effect on a success. It's bolstered on a crit success. On a failure, you control the undead creature for a minute. The effect ends if you or your ally attack it. Crit fail, your undead creature is controlled for an hour. Now, that's not a lot of time. That's why I say the players around you and your GM both have to be just totally on board with this or it doesn't work. A normal failure will give you that undead for 10 rounds. What you can do with it in the 10 rounds is up to you. This may, at low level play, be an example of turning one zombie against a couple of zombies. It might be quickly running that zombie into the middle of town and then abandoning it and getting as far away as you can, because then it'll go hostile to everyone when the effect ends. An hour isn't that much more time either, unless the graveyard happens to be right outside the dungeon. At the moment, this is only handing you little undead. This is handing you CR1 or 0 creatures, so it may also be possible, and again, it comes down to the party being on board to, in a traditional dungeon crawl kind of game, bait a bunch of undead to go outside a dungeon and then corral them somehow. Remembering, of course, that we're all much faster and have more actions than they do, and maybe you, the Necromancer, can come grab a whole bunch of them as needed, but it takes a little longer than this to take off. Of course, these controlled undead will gain the minion trait, which means they can use 2 actions per turn, and they cannot use reactions. They act on your turn in combat. Once you spend an action to issue verbal commands, which has the concentrate trait, you can't have more than 4 of these guys, and that, at first, is the first hang-up, because that's how the Necromancer would work back in the day. You'd have just way too many enemies, you'd bog down the board, and that was the draw away from them, other than the fact that they really just didn't fit in most settings, was that your combat turn took so long because you had, an army of CR 1/3 skeletons at your beck and call. This time it's all about getting the strongest undead you can, and again, through the Bard archetype, buffing them to be as powerful as you can make them. At feat level 6, we'll get our hands on Necrotic Infusion, so we can add an extra verbal casting on our harms to heal a single undead creature to let them do an additional d6 of negative damage. If the harm spell was at least 5th level, it goes up to 2d6. 9th level will send it to 3d6. So enchant the undead, also heal them. It's a win-win, especially in a world where our guys are gonna probably tend a little weaker. Next in line at feat level 8, we'll get our hands on Improved Command Undead. With this feat, if the undead fails its save, you control it for 10 minutes. If it critically fails, you control it for an hour. Now, there's a silver lining to the fact that we can only target things that are a few levels lower than we are. That means they're going to critically fail more often. This means that once we have our hands on this feat, we should be able to have our undead for a little bit longer. And those undead should be able to stand in combat, maybe not the entire time, but for a decent amount of time. I think this time we're looking a little less at sending hordes of the undead at people and more at having something on the board that took damage that wasn't the party. Or, in the case of the neutral evil Bard Cleric of Urgathoa, that wasn't you. And you can always patch them right back up with harm. Easy peasy. Anywho, it is inspirational at level 10, so we can get Inspire Courage. That's the move. By level 10, we could have a level 7 undead. So, for example, a Greater Shadow. A Greater Shadow is swinging at touch for a bunch of negative damage and has other things it can do, none of which take more than an action. So the move is to make Lore Urgathoa checks and religion checks to figure out where shadows spawn, where we can find them. Its will is plus 12, so hike your DC up as high as you can as you level. Throw a 2-action harm at range and add the extra action. If we get a hold of 2 of these, the combat move is spend an action to command one, spend 1 action to command the other, then Inspire Courage. The plus 1 means they're swinging 17 over touch, doing 3d6 plus 1 negative damage. I imagine a plus 17 over touch will hit someone. Once they hit, use the second action for Steel Shadow. Super good. At feat level 14, Fast Channel looked pretty good. trade out an extra action to make one of your actions a reaction when casting harm. At 16th level, we'll be taking basic Muse's Whispers for lingering performance, save up our action economy just a little bit. It also feeds really well into this next feat. One more Bard feat at level 18, it's Inspire Heroics. Once you're done casting Inspire Courage for one more action, attempt a performance check with the DC equal to a high difficulty DC of a level equal to that of the highest level target of your composition, but the GM can make it go up or down. I could argue for down, because most of the time we're targeting our literal minions. On a success, Inspire Courage increases to +2. Critically succeed that perform check, it goes to +3. A failure does nothing bad for us. And at 20th level, of course, we're going to grab that 10th level casting for our Cleric. A, because Miracle's really powerful, and B, as the game moves forward, if there's ever like a conjure many undead power kind of ability, that's where we're going to find it. Now, there's only a couple of skill feats we're worried about here today. And the general feats are, you've heard them forever and ever and ever. Same with the Ancestry feats. We're a halfling. Get Lucky Halfling, get Guiding Luck, be adopted by gnomes, get a familiar. As a cleric, we're expert in Fort and Will, but only trained in Reflex and Perception. We will need Alertness, we will need Lightning Reflexes. Incredible Initiative isn't bad. For that last general feat, do whatever. Skill feats though, there's a couple of interesting ones we can throw down. We're Charisma based, so there's no reason we couldn't get our hands on Diplomacy skill feats, Deception skill feats, and Intimidate skill feats. Blatantly stealing this one from Mr. Citadino in our Discord because the man had a really good point. Scare to Death looks pretty good on this build. Again, attempting an Intimidation check at feat level 15, once you're legendary in Intimidation, against the will DC of a living creature within 30 feet of you that you sense or see and who can sense or see you. If it doesn't understand the language you're speaking or can't hear you, it's a -4. It gets bolstered. It's Frightened 2 and Fleeing 1 on a success. Critically succeed. It rolls against your Intimidation DC on a fort save this time or dies. Frightened 1 on a failure, unaffected on a crit failure. But it's one action. 2 is probably the magic number of Undead in this build. Command you for an action, command you for an action. You guys have 4 actions, and then buff if I need to. Keep everybody buffed, keep everybody healed, and then, you know, try to snipe somebody. Why not? The other skill feat that looks super good for this build is Virtuosic Performer. This gives you a +2 circumstance bonus when making a certain type of performance. Basically choose your instrument, and when you're making perform checks for your lingering performance, for your Inspire Heroics, help yourself succeed. It's a win-win. Now, there's a couple spells we'll be talking about on this build. At the end of the day, if you just can't keep minions, you're still a full divine caster. If you can't keep minions, you could just as easily trade out some of your command undead stuff and get occult spells on top of your divine spells, so you're still super powerful, but mostly I think we're just running in with heightened harms. If you end up having 2 actions, like when one of your zombie boys dies, a 2-action harm that you can chuck at somebody isn't bad. It's also not bad to use that 2-action harm to throw at one of your wounded guys who's 30 feet in front of you. But Bind Undead, a 3rd level spell with 2 actions at a range of 30 feet that targets one mindless undead creature with a level no greater than Bind Undead's spell level. And since there's no heighten option, I assume that must mean 3 or less, but maybe you can heighten it. I don't know. Jury's kind of out on that one. If you think you understand that, throw it in the comments. I want to say you can't though, but it does auto give you control of the target with no save, as long as you don't beat up on the undead. It of course gains the minion trait. So we'd grab that at level 6, and that tracks with the level -3 thing. Grab as many zombies as you can. You can only ever have 4. Walk them into the dungeon and then turn them loose. Especially if you know there's like weak dudes in the room. We don't care what happens to those zombies. Zombies are probably very easy to find. So are skeletons, things of that nature. And if they take damage, so we didn't. And if they do damage, so we never put ourselves at risk, so much the better. Now, the most powerful undead in the bestiary right now is a Saxra. It's an uncommon 18th level undead, so we can never control this thing. That is kind of unfortunate because it's really powerful, but it is what it is. Since it will always be level -3, the strongest thing we control at level 20, though truthfully I thought it was the Windigo. It's not the Windigo. It's one of my favoriteest monsters ever, the Warsworn. It has a will of +24, so it tracks about the same as our Scared to Death Cleric. It's gonna be pretty hard to get this guy right now. It has a pretty good chance to pass things, but if you get it, the fact that it can make strikes with weapons out to 100 feet, the fact that it can throw waves of bodies to energy drain you, though it could never trample, unfortunately. The fact that it literally has a scrap ball that it could shoot at you. At high level play, that's what we're looking for. Again, it's like scaring a phoenix to death. It's gonna be a little hard to grab it right now, but at low level play, auto-grabbing a bunch of mindless undead and throwing them at the bad guys is a perfectly legitimate strategy. Especially, again, if you've worked with your GM and party, and they're gonna be all over the place. They've seen to it that it will happen, and that's how this build at low level play, before we can get one of our pride and joy monsters, seeks to win combat. It's a war of attrition. And hey, you know, if you kill stuff with your undead and they happen to come back as undead, well, the rich get richer, and so do you. But what do you guys think about Necromancy right now? Is Animate Dead a divine spell, or is it a ritual? Have you tried to build this in the playtest so far? Personally, I was really hoping to see a Necromancer come in at a fair at Somberfell Hall, cause it would have been hilarious. But how are we feeling about the Pathfinder playtest right now? Are we still digging it? We still having fun? Throw it in the comments, let me know. And again, be sure to like and subscribe for more sweet Pathfinder playtest coverage. And Nicholas, I hope this shed a little bit of light on how the undead might be able to work a little better in your campaigns. Hopefully Paizo will hear you. I'm very stoked to see how our necromancers will function. But next week, we're going to break out the ranger who focuses not on being the sneakiest supercharger, but on fighting in melee with their animal companion. See you next week.